Thank you so much, both Maha and Deepa, for grounding the discussion. So we're gonna actually have some time for you all to ask questions, and then we're gonna turn it over to explain a little bit about what Maha mentioned about local DC work that we're hoping folks can plug into. My laptop, I believe, is still going around. Please do sign in. This is a way for us to continue communicating with folks here to talk about future events, future actions, to get an idea from you all about what skills, resources you might have that we may be able to be plugged into. But yeah, any questions? And I can just call on you, and I'll repeat the question so others will be able to hear it.
Seems like, yes, the communities locally have more assets and resources, as we discussed, but I imagine the programs are going to be designed with that knowledge in mind and try to circumvent it. So how do you imagine it being implemented in ways that differ than it was implemented before?
Yeah, so she was asking that Deepa was saying how there are definitely more resources now to counter a lot of these programs, but also the programs are being designed knowing that these extra resources are happening, so how do we kind of counteract that?
Thanks, Sarah. I mean, I can start, but I really would like Darshan and Maha and others to step in as well because they work directly with Muslim communities here in DC. No, I think that generally speaking, as you know, all of the policies and practices that have been put into place over the last decade and a half have been done in many ways to circumvent, as you said, the community assets that exist, right? So when you think about the NYPD surveillance program that Maha spoke about, the surveillance extended to nonprofit organizations and activists in the Muslim community in New York City. So I am hopeful, though, that it is different now because we are way more aware of what the impact is and the different ways that we can actually attack this and maybe not even have it happen. So the best way I think that we can deal with this is number one, to line up legal resources that need to be given to people. So whether it's immigration lawyers or pro bono law school clinics, making space for having, bringing and defending people if they need to, representing people. So I think there has to be a real legal push. The second is organizing. So especially within Muslim Arab South Asian communities, when this happened earlier, I think people felt that they had no choice but to comply. I think there's a big question right now whether or not people do what's up on that screen, right? To say, I will not register, I will not comply. What will that mean? So I think those sorts of questions that have to come from affected communities and people understanding what the impact is if they do and do not. Those conversations need to be had. Litigation to, attack this in different ways. And then the advocacy that's happening both at the national and the local level. So we have cities, I'm not sure about DC, but we have cities around the country that are looking at resolutions to say that they're going to be hate-free zones, sanctuary cities, and then there has to be an added push to that, a component. It can't just be those two pieces, right? Which is our city will not, be a place where there is a Muslim registry center. And that has to be very explicitly put out there. So I think on all those levels, there are ways that we could make sure that this doesn't happen, and if it does, that we're ready to address it.
So I don't have much to add, but I will say that the fact that many Muslims, for example, have not known or not been aware of the fact that this policy existed prior is somewhat of a window of opportunity. So we've seen a lot of Muslims in particular investing time in learning more about sort of the history of the war on terror. So I think one thing that's especially important is political education. So really informing Muslims and the broader community of the fact that this isn't a new policy. And I think that that's one way in particular that we can leverage our resources and power. And I know there's a group in New York called DC's Rising Up and Moving that has really been active in the front lines and doing a lot of work around special registration, not only in terms of combating what may come in the future, but really highlighting the fact that this is not a new policy. So I think a lot of it is about gaining this political education and awareness, and I think if we're able to do that, I think we'll be much more prepared. I don't think we could ever have had such a policy in 2002 and 2003 if people had been more informed about what it would entail, what it would involve, and the consequences that would be inflicted upon the Muslim community. I'm hopeful that now, with many more people learning about what it has actually involved, that we can significantly curb the impact that it has.
I wanted to follow up on that question about cities not having registration centers. And of course, DC has a tough place. As the federal district, we're not completely in control of our laws. So I wanted someone to talk about how we can best avoid that or prevent that. And then the second part is, I know there's been some organizing online where people say, well, this is implemented, I'm going to register to overwhelm the system. I'm not sure if we're going to do that. But it's a nice gesture, but I wanted to hear someone talk about that idea. Thanks.
Is anyone doing the DC organizing or the?
Yeah, I can talk to that. Would you mind second question again?
So the DC one was, I think there was the idea that in addition to being a sanctuary city or in trying to be against hate crimes, you could also get your city to be on record to not be a registration center. And DC is not completely, city. We've got our issues.
Yeah, so I'll repeat the question, and I appreciate the question because it talks about particularly the district itself not explicitly saying anything about not actually hosting any of the registry centers. I know that locally we've been part of some discussions with other also local organizers about what does it mean right now to be a sanctuary city. I was going to talk about this actually much later, so I'll lay the piece around Bowser's office and local organizing in particular. So I want to come back to that question after maybe we talk some content stuff, but that is exactly where we're headed. So thank you for bringing that up.
So on the second question on solidarity, really quickly, I mean, I think that actions of solidarity like that are very important, but I think there are lots of things that we can do before we get to that point. So what I've seen people encourage are to actually do things like send in letters to the editor of your newspaper to say that these sorts of policies or potential policies really bother you because you're a resident of DC or Montgomery County or wherever, and why, right? I think that shifting the public narrative, not normalizing something like this is really important. So with the political education that Maha spoke about, all of us can actually take that education and turn it into some sort of action in the next week, right, before the inauguration. So I would call upon everyone to think about what is one thing that you could do before the inauguration. I know there will be more conversations about that, but so letters to the editor to shift the narrative space. We've seen, tech companies come out to say that they wouldn't design a Muslim registry or Muslim database. So are there actions of solidarity that could prevent this from even taking hold as a potential program? I think the goal is to create an environment where a Muslim registry is going to be untenable and ineffective and will not capture the popular imagination or the support of Americans, and to send that message well before January 21st. If it does get implemented, then I think acts like that are important, but I think they have to be done in confluence and collaboration with Muslim communities in particular, who will say what they need from the rest of us, and so to really take our guidance from those who are affected.
And I want to echo what Deepa said, but I also want to add that I think that is actually a particularly ineffective strategy in terms of the Muslim registry. And the reason is because the government has had over 15 years at this point to surveil Muslims. Islam has been racialized such that there's a particular way that Muslims are constructed, right? So I don't think it would be an effective strategy, and I don't think it would slow down the process at all to have sort of a large group of white people try to register. That's not who they're looking for. They're looking for a particular identity that's represented by having sort of an ethnic origin, by looking Muslim, etc. So I don't think that that's an effective strategy. And I think in general, when we have discussions about what are some useful strategies around solidarity, what Deepa said absolutely is great. But also just thinking more critically about how we challenge policies, right? And thinking more about what it does in the service of the group that's being targeted, rather than how it makes certain groups feel, right? In particular, if it's a group of white people that would just want to perform an act of solidarity, what utility does it actually have? And how will Muslims actually receive this act of solidarity?
So in an age where things exist on computers everywhere and shared very easily in various places, what does it mean concretely to disband or dismantle the NCR system?
So I can speak a little to that, but I also invite people who are here who have more technical knowledge to please raise your hand and add on. So that's a really good question, right? So there's a couple of things to it. So the NCR's framework, like the legal and regulatory framework, as I mentioned, still exists. So what happened was that the countries were delisted or taken off, but the administrative regulation that gave birth to NCRs in the first place is still part of the regs or the regulations, the federal regulations. So that's what we're trying to get rid of, so that a new administration can't just say, oh look, we already have this in the federal, in the regulation, so we can just use it, right? What we would like the new administration to do is to go through the hard work of actually getting something out in the Federal Register, seeking public comment, having a public comment period, and during that time have as much, of a kind of response, a strong response legally and from a public standpoint, media standpoint, community standpoint. So it is not to say that the new administration could not resurrect this. It is to say that we want to set up roadblocks so that it is not as easy for them to resurrect it or revive it. President Obama and the Department of Homeland Security have the ability to rescind that framework and set up those roadblocks if they choose. So sending them a message to do that would also be a great, plan of action before the 21st. In terms of the other question, yes, the federal government has a lot of information about all of our communities, or certain communities. As we saw with the questions that were asked during the special registration interview process, email addresses, when did you visit your home country last, where do you pray, all of that is there. Not to mention all the programs that Maha outlined, which also have, gathered information about Muslim, Arab, South Asian communities. So that information still exists and can be used, but I think it's the same when we think about, immigrant youth who have received DACA, right? Their information is in the system. And so there are some efforts that are happening to try to keep some of that confidential. I don't know if that can actually go anywhere, but at least from the standpoint of NCRs, that information is there, and it has likely been shared with other local and state law enforcement already.
One more question.
We'll definitely get to that. No worries.
I was wondering if you could answer if it would be helpful for us to contact our elected representatives. I'm not sure if they do reenact or something like it, does that have to come us office? Is there anything that we contact our senators